I moved back to the city in September, when the ocean still smelled like warm iron and lemons, and the gulls were too lazy to scream at boats. The landlord said I was lucky. The apartment had light. He said it like a blessing, like a warning, like a thing that might leave if I wasn't careful with it. I nodded and carried my 2 suitcases up the narrow stairs and into rooms that looked nothing like the ones we had shared, except that the afternoon light ran across the floorboards in the same long bars, as if someone were. I set a glass on the sill and watched the way the light went through it, slow and patient, splitting into a thin rainbow along the plaster. It made the paint look like it was breathing. I thought, stupidly, this is the kind of thing you would have photographed, how an ordinary glass could be a cathedral if the sun was in the right mood. You used to stop me on the street and hold up your phone like a priest raising an icon. "Wait," you would whisper. "Don't move, the light just decided to love you." It's strange the tricks memory plays. It pretends it wants to heal you, then opens a door and ushers you back through the worst parts, hands gentle on your shoulders. I'd promised myself I wouldn't let it run the show. I came back here to work, to rinse the past from my mouth with salt air, to be the version of me that paid bills on time and ate actual vegetables. I came back because I wanted to look directly at the seawall where we first kissed and not flinch. The city had grown new scaffolds since we left. Cranes bent over the docks like metal herons. Tourists had found better shoes. The bakery on Harrow Street now sold donuts with names like Solar Eclipse and Cardamom Friday. But the coffee shop on the corner hearth, the one with the window seats and the copper countertop, was exactly the same, down to the chalkboard sign that always leaned a little too hard to the left, the barista who wore a green scarf in all seasons, and the plant in the corner that had somehow. I went there the first morning, set my notebook on the counter like a passport, and ordered the thing I used to order when I believed being alive meant at least 1 cinnamon roll per day. I moved back, I told the barista, which was not what she'd asked. She smiled in a way that made room for the words I hadn't said, and slid the roll to me like absolution. I didn't come to Hearth to be sentimental. I came because I needed a place where the world arranged itself into chapters. Morning rush, quiet stretch, lunch pulse, afternoon drift. I needed a table that would forgive me for taking it all day in exchange for the purchase of a single coffee and the occasional smile. I needed a window to sit in and let the light decide if it still recognized me. The first letter to you began without warning. My hand simply started moving, as if it had been waiting for me to sit down and locate the horizon. Claire, I write your name, and it is still a weather pattern. It was a foolish opening. I kept it anyway. I told myself that I would find a mailbox by the harbor and send the letter ceremonially, as if successfully launching it into the postal system might count as letting go. But I knew I wouldn't. The point wasn't delivery. The point was to speak where I had once been silent. I bought a small stack of cream envelopes and a fountain pen because there are battles you only win if you let yourself be ridiculous. At lunch, I walked to the pier. The old lighthouse still wore its coat of stubborn white, the paint flaking in the same places it had always flaked. Kids were crabbing with clothespins and bacon. The water was the unbothered gray of a cat. I stood a while and tried to remember the exact lines of our last argument, the one that sent us away from this city and from each other. I thought if I could write it down perfectly, every misstep, every silence we mistook for mercy, I could disarm it. But the mind edits backward. It highlights where you should have kissed and fades what you shouted. On the third day, I fixed the wobble in my kitchen table and felt like a surgeon. On the fifth, I learned the bus schedule well enough to pretend it was a language I'd always spoken. On the seventh, I saw you or someone I decided to call you from a distance, standing at a crosswalk with a paper bag of oranges. The light changed, and the city ushered us forward like a tired usher at the end of a matinee. I didn't call out. Even if it had been you, I wasn't sure which version of me would answer back. The letters multiplied. I numbered them in the top corner like field notes. Number A from the window at Hearth. Number A from the bench by the ferry terminal, where an old man in a fisherman's cap told me the tides had grown rude in his old age, arriving earlier, leaving without a handshake. #3 from my kitchen, where I wrote between boiling water and noodles, where the steam fogged the glass and made the street lamps out there look shy. I didn't tell anyone I was writing. People misunderstand this sort of behavior and either look at you with deep worry or worse, a kind of delighted pity, as if your heartbreak were a hobby you were good at. I am not good at it. I am only patient. You would have liked my neighbors, a violin teacher who practiced scales so tenderly I began to suspect they were lullabies. A couple who argued about whether basil would grow on a west-facing sill and kissed in the hall whenever they ran into each other carrying trash. A dog with one ear that refused to point, where sometimes at dusk we all appeared at our separate windows like minor characters, discovering they were in the same play. I tried to imagine what part one was meant to deliver. I wrote in letter number 4. There is a light in my new bedroom that stops halfway across the floor, like a sentence I can't finish. I think of you when it does that, how you could always find the verb. On a Sunday, I carried a small plant home from the market, because living things make you accountable. The woman at the stall told me its name, something Latin and forgiving, and said to put it where it could see the morning. I put it on the table where I ate and wrote and mailed nothing. I watered it with a seriousness I did not apply to most other aspects of my life. There are whole afternoons in this city that feel like a rehearsal for joy. A skateboarding kid will shout an apology to a pigeon. A bus driver will wait while a breathless woman runs, laughing at herself, hand outstretched. The postal worker will whistle, and then the fog rolls in and the rehearsal breaks and we bow, and the stagehands turn out the lights one by one. I saw your name finally printed on a flyer tacked to the bulletin board at Hearth, a small photography show at a gallery near the river, 2 weeks from Thursday. The flyer listed 4 artists. You were one. I sat down on the stool by the sugar and read your name until it meant nothing, and then meant everything again. The green scarf barista asked if I was okay, as if she'd been trained for this sort of emergency. I said that person is a friend, and felt the way the verb changed the weather. That afternoon I walked to the gallery because I needed to see the walls that would hold your work. It had once been a warehouse for rope, and the ceiling still knew how to listen. The director wore round glasses and told me, as directors do, that the show would be intimate but spacious. I nodded because I did not trust my mouth. In the back, a woman was painting the word light in a clean serif across a canvas. It seemed like a word that could save or scold you, depending on how it was said. I wrote letter number 8 on the steps outside, my back against the warm brick. Your name is on a wall again. You always said it didn't matter where it was as long as it wasn't in my mouth. I am trying to respect that. But I have learned that respect and longing are neighbors who borrow sugar from each other and never return the measuring cup. At night, the apartment made its new sounds. Pipes confessed to each other. The fridge rehearsed being a storm. I lay awake and listened to people on the sidewalk practicing goodbyes they didn't believe in. I thought of the last morning in our old place, how you folded your sweaters like you were apologizing to them, how I asked if we could wait one more day before we said anything final, how we both looked at the clock as if time were a witness we needed to. The week of your show, I bought a black shirt because that seemed like the kind of choice you would approve. Simple, cooperative with light. I told myself I would go and not become a problem. I would look and listen and leave. I would be what I had failed to be before, kind, when kindness cost something. On the way to the gallery, the sky broke open into perfect blue, the kind that looks like an answer. I stood on the bridge and watched a boat pass under, and thought the unnecessary thought, if I dropped my letters here, would they float toward you in some sensible sequence? I kept walking. The gallery was full without being crowded. People stood in clusters like semicolons. The first photograph of yours I saw was a glass of water on a windowsill, the light touching it, as if to teach it a word. I laughed quietly and unhappily at the obviousness of it and at my own vanity for thinking you might be talking to me. The caption read, "Where the light stayed, I stayed a little longer." The date was recent enough to make my chest feel like a narrow hallway. I found you 2 rooms over. You were talking to a man with a notebook and a woman with a necklace that looked like rain. Your hair was a little shorter, your posture the same careful arrangement of attention and fatigue. I did not move closer. I did not speak your name. I let the light make its case and the air perform its old trick of thinning. I looked instead at the photograph behind you. A table with a plant on it, morning light, confessing itself across the leaves. It was not my table, not my plant, not my morning. I was grateful. I was not. When you turned, we saw each other. There is a small sound the world makes when recognition happens. It's the sound of a coat falling from a hook in another room. You smiled first, because you always did. My body did the math of walking and then refused. We were standing in front of the same picture, which seemed like an omen or a prank. You said my name the way a person says a word they learned in childhood and haven't had to use in years. Ethan, Claire, we have always been good at beginnings. Even our endings start well. We did not touch. We did not ask the questions that would puncture the present tense. You said, "Are you okay?" And I said, "I'm learning." We made room for one another's pauses. You gestured toward the photograph and asked if I liked it, and I said, "I like that it believes in the future of the table." And you laughed, then looked down as if it were dangerous to let that sound travel too far. We spoke for 7 minutes, the way people do when the past is a sleeping animal in the next room. You told me you were staying across town for a while, that your mother had started wearing hats big enough to frighten pigeons, that there was a bakery near your place that made a bread that sounded like it might fix a person's life. I told you I'd moved back, that I was still bad at basil, that the coffee shop was exactly as we left it, that the lighthouse hadn't learned any new tricks. You said, "Of course it hasn't," as if that were a piece of good news. We'd promised to send each other something, an address, a link, a funny photograph of a dog named Taxicab we'd once met on the ferry. We did not exchange our actual phone numbers. There are lines you learn to respect when you've tripped over them already. Later at home, I put letter number 12 into the drawer with the others and pressed the stack flat with my palm. The plant on the table had turned itself toward the street lamp, which was trying its best to be a moon. I stood in the doorway and let the light find me. It did. It always did, with or without you. I was not healed. I was not hopeless. I was a person standing in an apartment he could afford, with a shirt that behaved in photographs and a drawer full of sentences. The city moved through its paces outside, unoffended by the fact of me. Somewhere a violin was forgiving an old scale. Tomorrow I will go to Hearth and claim the window and watch the way the light enters the room like a truth with good manners. I will not pretend it is enough. I will not pretend it is not. Where the light stayed, I stayed a little longer. The sea has a way of pretending it never met you. Every wave folds over the last, rehearsing amnesia. It's October now, colder, quieter. The city wears gray like it's proud of it. The gulls are back to screaming, and I've learned to sleep through them, mostly. Hearth replaced their chalkboard sign with one that reads Pumpkin Season, and the barista's green scarf has finally earned its keep. I sit in the same corner every morning, the one near the window where the sun hesitates before choosing to arrive. I keep writing you. I don't mean to, but the hand moves before the mind approves. I write about the sea, the people, the things I notice, so I can pretend I'm living instead of simply continuing. Letter number 17 begins. There are days when the water looks like a mirror too tired to lie. I don't send it. I never do. I fold it, slide it into the drawer, the stack rising like sediment in a river that refuses to dry. Some mornings I walk to the pier and count the boats. It's a useless ritual, but it makes the day start with a number instead of a name. There's a boy who fishes there, no older than 12, freckles like spilled sugar, always humming something from the radio. Yesterday he asked if I lived alone. When I said yes, he nodded as if it explained everything about me. He told me his father used to be a sailor but now drives buses because the sea keeps secrets too heavy for men. I asked what that meant, and he shrugged. Kids know how to leave sentences open. I think of you when the air smells like rain before it happens. You always said the scent of approaching storms was the truest form of honesty, something that announced itself without disguise. Maybe that's why you loved photographs. They never pretended to last, they just captured the moment before forgetting. The gallery extended your show. I walked by one afternoon and saw your name still there. The window reflected the river behind me, so for a moment it looked like you and I were standing side by side again, inside and outside of glass, both belonging to the same light. I didn't go in. I wasn't ready for that particular kindness. Instead, I walked along the harbor until my shoes began to taste of salt. The air carried pieces of conversation. Laughter, the slap of ropes against wood, The kind of silence that belongs only to people who have said everything already. I sat on a bench that remembered us, it must have, because it groaned the same way when we sat there years ago, pretending the world could stop if we asked politely enough. I closed my eyes and tried to count backward to reach the exact second before we fell apart. I could almost hear it, the clink of your cup, the sigh of the tide, the pause that wasn't yet a goodbye. But memory edits the script. It refuses to give you the whole line. That night I woke coughing. The air felt sharp, metallic, like the taste of coins. I told myself it was the season changing, or the damp creeping in from the window I never remembered to close. But my chest hurt longer than it should have, and the morning light seemed thinner, diluted, as if the sun had lost interest halfway through. I didn't go to the doctor. I bought lemons instead, as if citrus could bargain with mortality. The violin teacher downstairs started practicing slower pieces, adagio for strings, Spiegel, M. Spiegel. The kind of music that teaches you how to miss someone gracefully. Sometimes when she played, I'd leave the door open so the sound could climb the stairs. A week later, I found one of your photos printed in a local magazine. You had captured a hand reaching into the sea, the reflection blurring where the wrist met the tide. The caption read, "All we can hold is light." I tore the page out and placed it beside my letters, not out of superstition, but because the drawer felt incomplete without something that wasn't mine. I started coughing again that night. Harder. The kind of cough that makes you taste iron, that leaves you sitting on the floor waiting for air to remember you exist. When it passed, I laughed not because it was funny, but because it felt like the body's way of saying, "You didn't think healing would be easy, did you?" I wrote one more letter before dawn. Claire, there's a light here that refutes. It hits the ceiling and keeps going, as if it's looking for you. If it finds you, tell it to rest. I'm tired of being the one it stays for. I folded the paper, placed it under the plant. The leaves trembled, catching the weak sunrise. It felt almost like a reply. It must have been a mistake. At least, that's what I told myself when the letter arrived, creased, rain-stained, with my name spelled the way only one person ever wrote it, the loop of the sea curling like a question. Claire. The handwriting hadn't changed, though the ink had bled slightly, as if it, too, had traveled too far. The envelope had no return address, only a faint coffee ring in one corner, the ghost of a table I knew by heart. I hadn't seen his handwriting in 3 years, not since the night he'd left it behind on the kitchen counter, scrawled across a rent receipt and half a grocery list. Don't wait up. For a long time I didn't open it. I placed it on the windowsill beside the camera, watched the sunlight crawl across it, then retreat. Maybe I thought the light would do the reading for me. Maybe I just didn't want to let the letter stop being a possibility. When I finally tore the paper, the sound felt indecent, like breaking silence in a church. Claire, there's a light here that refuses to sleep. It hits the ceiling and keeps going, as if it's looking for you. If it finds you, tell it to rest. I'm tired of being the one it stays for. That was all. No greeting, no ending, just that 3 lines folded twice, that kind of message that carries more absence than presence. I didn't know where he was. I'd heard from mutual friends that he'd come back to the coast, that he was working again, quieter now, that he looked like someone who'd made peace with ghosts. I'd almost believed that peace was possible, until the letter. I called the post office. They couldn't trace it. Probably got mixed up in a batch, the clerk said. Sometimes they find things months later in the sorting machines. Months? That word hurt more than it should have. I went to the pier that evening, the same one where we'd once watched the fishermen untangle nets as the sky folded itself into rose-colored paper. The wind was sharp, clean. A child's kite had caught in the railing, its strings snapping in the air like an unfinished sentence. I wanted to believe the letter wasn't meant to reach me, that it was some quiet accident of the world, a message that lost its direction but found me anyway. But deep down I knew him. Ethan never mailed letters, which meant someone else did. Maybe the sea, maybe the light, maybe both. That night I dreamed of him, not the man who'd left, but the one who'd looked at the world as if every reflection was an invitation. In the dream he was sitting at a table, sunlight climbing his wrist, writing without looking up. When I stepped closer, I saw that his pages were blank, but the light moved as though it could read the words anyway. When I woke, I found myself searching for my old camera. The battery was dead, the lens dusty, but the weight of it in my hands felt like something familiar returning from exile. The next morning, I took it outside. The city looked both older and unchanged, its edges softened by mist. I began photographing small things, the reflection of a pigeon in a puddle, a broken sign, a woman braiding her daughter's hair near the bus stop. Nothing that mattered, and yet somehow everything did. By noon, I'd walked past Hearth without meaning to. The window was fogged, and through it, I saw a shape that made my pulse stall. A man, shoulders slightly hunched, notebook open, light on his sleeve. But it wasn't him, just someone with the same kind of stillness, the kind that comes from learning how to live with longing. Still, I stood outside longer than I should have. I told myself it was because the light was perfect, and maybe it was. That evening, I placed the letter back into its envelope and tucked it inside my journal. I wrote one line beneath it. If the light stayed, maybe he did too. The coughs come in pairs now. One to wake me, one to remind me why. They don't sound dangerous, not yet, just the small, sharp kind that breaks the quiet like a pebble hitting water. Still, I can feel something rearranging inside me, a geography shifting without permission. The doctor at the clinic called it stress-related, wrote down a prescription I haven't filled, and told me to drink more water. He didn't ask if I slept through the night. He didn't need to. It's strange, the things that can exhaust you, breathing, remembering, hoping. Even light seems heavier these days, as if it needs somewhere to rest too. I didn't mean for the letter to reach her. I'd written it weeks ago, folded it carefully, and placed it under the plant like all the others. But yesterday, when I went to water it, the envelope was gone. I told myself I must have misplaced it, perhaps tucked it inside another one by accident. And yet, this morning I felt it, the small shift in the air that happens when something you buried is unearthed. She knows. I don't know how, but she does. Maybe she found it the way the sea finds forgotten things, by refusing to let go. At Hearth, the barista asked if I was all right. I said yes, and the lie barely made it past my throat. She slid me my coffee with both hands, like she was afraid I might drop it. The cup was too warm. I held it anyway, grateful for proof that I could still feel. Outside, the street smelled of rain on metal. Cars hummed by like half-remembered songs. I tried to write, but the page kept rejecting the pen letters, breaking apart mid-sentence, ink catching on invisible grains of dust. So I walked. The sea was louder than usual, swollen from last night's storm. Waves slammed against the seawall, spilling their arguments across the stones. I stood close enough for the spray to hit my face, and for a second it felt like being forgiven. I thought of the last time I'd seen her, how her laughter had filled that gallery room, how the light had chosen her again. I remember thinking that if I ever wrote another line about her, it would have to be honest. So here it is. I am afraid. Not of dying, not exactly. It's the forgetting that scares me, the idea that one morning I might wake and not remember the sound of her voice saying my name, like it was both a question and an answer. The cough came again, this time deep enough to bend me forward. I wiped my mouth, half expecting to see red. There was none, only the taste of iron and something faintly sweet, like the edge of an apple gone soft. I sat down on the bench by the pier, the one that still knows our weight. I wanted to write, but my hands wouldn't cooperate. The letters shook, the lines blurred. I rested my head against the railing and listened to the wind play its unfinished melody through the flags. A boy passed by with a kite. It was the same kind Claire used to photograph, bright yellow, shaped like the sun, refusing to set. He smiled at me, asked if I wanted to help untangle the string. I did for a while. We laughed when the wind took it too high, both pretending that losing something could still be beautiful. When he ran off, I stayed, watching the kite disappear into a sky too wide to promise anything. Back home, the plant had turned brown at the tips. I cut them off carefully, whispering an apology it couldn't hear. The stack of letters in the drawer had grown uneven. I rearranged them like a deck of memories I wasn't ready to play. For the first time, I wrote her name on the front of an envelope and didn't stop halfway. Claire, I think the light found you. I hope it's kinder now. I sealed it, addressed it, and set it on the table. I don't know if I'll send it. Maybe the sea will come for this one too. Maybe that's what it's been waiting for all along. When the coughing fit came again, I didn't fight it. I just sat there, letting it pass through me like a tide. Between breaths, I caught a glimpse of the light spilling through the window, gentle, relentless, almost human. And I thought, maybe that's what love is, after all. The space between one breath and the next, where everything hurts, and still, somehow you stay. When I arrived at the station, the sea smelled the same. That was the first betrayal. The city hadn't changed much, only I had. It greeted me with the same salt wind and the same tired gulls circling the harbor, as if time had looped back on itself and was waiting for me to admit I'd never really left. I told myself I was here for work, a small commission to photograph the old districts before they were rebuilt. But we both know that isn't true. The truth is simpler. I came because of the letter. Because there are certain kinds of silence that only end where they began. His address wasn't hard to find. I still remembered the street by sound alone, the way cobblestones made shoes talk. The building was old, sea gray, 3 floors with paint peeling around the windows. The curtains were open, and light pooled across the glass like something alive. For a long time I didn't move. It felt like if I stood there quietly enough, I could still hear him turning pages, coughing once, the rhythm of someone learning to live with pain. Then the landlord appeared, a man with the kind of face that had weathered too many tenants. "Looking for Mr. Pei?" he asked, using the name as if it were still in use. I nodded. He hesitated. "He's been gone about 2 weeks now. Left most of his things. Said he'd come back for them, but..." He shrugged, letting the unfinished sentence hang like dust in the air. Gone. That word didn't sound final. Not yet. I asked if he'd left a forwarding address. The landlord shook his head, then added, "He asked about mailing something. Said if anyone came asking, I should tell them to check the sea." The sea. Of course. I walked down to the harbor, where the air had that same metallic chill. The pier boards groaned underfoot. There was a bench, and beside it a small plant, leaves browned but still reaching for the light. Someone had left it there on purpose. The pot was chipped. Inside, half buried under dry soil, was an envelope. My name on it? I didn't open it right away. The wind was too loud, the sky too blue for endings. I sat holding it in my lap, letting the weight of it remind me that even paper can ache. When I finally unfolded it, the ink was pale, like it had already begun to let go. Claire, by the time you read this, I'll be somewhere quieter. Don't mistake that for peace. It's just distance. I wanted to tell you that the light here never learned to forget you. I tried to. I failed beautifully. There was no signature, but it didn't need one. The water moved below, slow and deliberate, dragging pieces of sunlight into itself. I leaned forward, and for the first time in years, I spoke to the sea. "Tell him," I said softly, "I found the light." The wind carried the words away, toward the horizon that had once belonged to both of us. I stayed until the sun slipped down, until the city lights came on one by one, mimicking the stars they could no longer see. When I stood to leave, the plant caught the last of the light and held it, trembling. Maybe that's all memory is, a plant that keeps turning toward something that's already gone. They've turned the bed toward the window. The nurse said light helps the body remember the day. I think it just helps me remember her. The room smells like antiseptic, and Salt the hospital sits close enough to the sea that you can hear waves in the oxygen machine's rhythm. Every breath arrives late, as if it's been traveling too long to find me. Someone left the curtains half open. That's how the light finds me, now politely, cautiously, like it's learned not to startle the dying. It's quiet. Quiet in the way mornings are right before they realize someone won't see noon. On the bedside table, a glass of water, a pen, a single sheet of paper. I've been staring at it for hours, trying to write something worth the air it will take to say. But the sentences keep dissolving halfway through, words slipping under the surface like stones. The doctor came earlier. He talked about progression, about comfort, about acceptance. I nodded at the right times, the way polite people do when they've already chosen their ending. What I didn't tell him is that I've already written most of my goodbyes. They're all in that drawer by the sea letters, folded like lungs that forgot how to open. This one, though, is different. It's not for her to find. It's for me to finish. Claire, I used to think light was proof of survival. Now I think it's proof of attention, that the world keeps looking. even when we don't. You once told me that photographs aren't about keeping things, but about learning how to let them go beautifully. I think I understand now. I'm leaving soon, but not the way people mean it. Just smaller, quieter. If you ever wonder where I went, look for the place where the sea forgets to move, where the light lingers too long. I'll be there, practicing how to stay. My hand shakes before I can sign my name. The pen slips, leaving a small black mark on the sheet, an eclipse in miniature. I smile. Even my mistakes look like moons now. Outside, the morning builds itself piece by piece. Nurses trade shifts. The sea breathes against the window. Somewhere down the hall, someone is laughing loudly, recklessly. It sounds like mercy. I close my eyes and imagine the room at hearth, the smell of cinnamon and coffee, the barista's green scarf, the plant that refused to die. I imagine her sitting by the window again, camera in hand, chasing the same sunlight that's resting now on my pillow. There's a warmth spreading through my chest, slow, heavy, certain. It feels like the body's way of saying enough. I think of her name one last time. It doesn't hurt. It glows. The light moves higher, spilling across the floor like a tide that's finally made up its mind. And when it reaches the bed, I breathe once and stay. The gallery smelled of salt and varnish. Someone had left the doors open, letting the sea breathe inside. The waves outside kept time like a metronome, steady and patient, as if they too had come to listen. It was Ethan's exhibition, though he would have hated to call it that. The sign by the entrance read simply, "Where the light stayed, a conversation between photographs." Half the frames were his, the other half were mine. His were smaller, quieter windows more than pictures. Mine were responses, the same scenes retaken from where he used to stand. The light changed, but still familiar. People moved softly through the room, speaking in whispers, as if afraid to disturb whatever invisible thing was still unfolding. The sound system played a single, looped recording, his voice, thin but steady, captured on an old cassette I'd found among his things. "The thing about light," he said, "is that it doesn't belong to anyone. It just visits. Sometimes it stays longer than we deserve." The audience stilled whenever his voice came. I stood by the last photograph, a close-up of the sea, sunlight breaking it into gold dust, and tried to listen without breaking. He'd recorded those words months before the end. I knew because in the background I could hear the faint hum of Hearth's espresso machine, the scrape of his chair, the same breath he'd always take before writing. In front of the photograph lay the plant, the same one. I'd brought it from the pier. It had grown new leaves since then. Its roots had tangled into the shape of a heart, or maybe I was imagining it. Someone asked if I would speak. I nodded, though my voice had been living underwater for weeks. "I used to think," I began, "that photographs were a way of freezing time. But he taught me they're just conversations between light and loss. You don't capture light, you answer it." A pause. The waves filled the silence for me. Ethan once wrote that the sea forgets, but the light remembers. I think he was wrong. I smiled through it. The sea remembers too, it just speaks in echoes. I turned then, looking at the last frame, the one he had taken right before the hospital. It wasn't of me or of any place we'd been together. It was just a wall of sunlight, pure, unframed brightness. The caption, written in his hand, said, "For the one who taught the light to stay." The tape clicked softly as it ended. The room held its breath. Outside, the sun was setting, pouring itself through the open door. The light moved across the floorboards, slow and deliberate, touching every photograph, every face, every silence. It stopped at the plant, lingered, and for a moment, only a moment, it felt like it turned to look at me. And then it stayed. "Ethan, it's been 40 days since the exhibition. The plant is still alive. I think you'd like that. Every morning I open the window so the light can reach it. The sea breeze comes in with the same familiar salt, the same soft exhaustion. Some days it smells like hope. Other days it smells like goodbye. I've stopped trying to tell the difference. Your photographs are still on the wall. I kept the one of pure sunlight above my desk. People ask why there's nothing in it, they say. But I think that's the point. You always said emptiness isn't absence, it's invitation. I talk to you sometimes, not in the way that expects an answer, but in the way someone might hum an unfinished song. I tell you about the city, the crane that finally finished its building, the boy with the kite who still runs by the pier, the barista who wears her green scarf like a flag for kindness. Hearth renamed one of their drinks after you. It's called the Light Stayed. I tried it once. It tastes like cinnamon and something I can't describe without using your name. I still walk by the sea every evening. I take my camera, but I don't always take pictures. Sometimes it's enough just to wait for the light to do something ordinary, spill across the water, touch the rail, catch on my sleeve, and you would have loved this. I think you were right about one thing. Light pays attention. It notices. And sometimes when the wind moves a certain way, I feel it pause, like it's checking whether I'm still looking back. I am. But I'm also learning to face forward, to live the way you did near the end, simply honestly, as if everything we touch is temporary, and that's what makes it precious. You once told me that love isn't about holding on. It's about standing still long enough for the other person to arrive. I used to think you meant forgiveness. Now I think you meant peace. I don't know where you are, but I like to believe you're somewhere the light doesn't have to chase you anymore. Somewhere the sea finally forgot to move. Somewhere that feels like a beginning, disguised as rest. So if you can see this, if light really does remember, then know this too, I'm still here. And where the light stays, I'll stay a little longer. Claire, I have been here longer than they think. Longer than the walls that held their laughter. Longer than the tide that took their names. I am what remains when stories end. The quiet between the last word and the closing breath. I watched them once, two small figures by the sea, arguing gently about how to photograph a sunset. He said light could be captured. She said it could only be witnessed. Neither was wrong. When he left, I followed him. When she returned, I followed her too. That is what I do. I stay where love once happened. People believe I move, that I rise and fall with the sun. But that isn't true. I only change shape. Sometimes I am a reflection in glass. Sometimes I am the warmth on a wrist, a flicker across a page, the pause before a word like home. They are gone now, but they taught me something I didn't know. That light isn't about brightness, it's about memory. Because even after eyes close, I still see. Even after names fade, I still call. If you stand by the sea someday and the wind slows, and the water forgets to move, you might see me there, a soft shimmer, a brief persistence. Don't reach for me, just look. And in that moment, know this, I stayed, because they did.